Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the second public meeting on the Morningside Flooding Infrastructure Project. We're here tonight to come back to you with some updated information and some new concepts, and we're really interested in hearing from you, and we're glad you're joining us this evening. To get us started, we're going to have a presentation from the project team by Ross Bittner, and then we will take questions during the presentation through the site where we're streaming this on bettertogetheredina.org/morningside. Feel free to submit your questions during the meeting, and then also on YouTube, where we're also live streaming this tonight. We'll have a question and answer period at the end, and we will be responding to those questions. We'll also do some follow-up after the meeting on the site, and this is just the start of a conversation that we'll have with you in the community, more to come. But we appreciate you being here and going through this information with us this evening. So with that, I will turn the time over to Ross Bittner.
Thanks, Patty. Yeah, thanks for helping me put this this video together for the public, and go live tomorrow night when we start answering questions. I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to start going through a presentation. Patty, if I'm not coming clear through you know, I'm up at the engineering level and I need to come down to the public level, you're going to help me by asking some clarifying questions.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm sharing my screen now. So this presentation is encapsulating a lot of work that we've done for reviewing flood risk reduction options for the Morningside neighborhood. And while it's just Patty and I here today, there's a lot more people that are behind us helping us out. And another familiar face from the city is Jessica Wilson, our water resource coordinator. She's been helping with you know, putting a public face to this and getting it out to the public. Sarah Stratton with Bar Engineering, the senior water resource scientist. She's leading a technical team at Bar Engineering that's really helping us get into the details. And you've met Patty with Zan Associates, our engagement specialist. So our overview for the presentation, we're going to go a little bit through the context. We're going to talk about some of the infrastructure goals for the neighborhood. We're going to talk about key issue and opportunity areas. Then we're going to go through the choices that we have when we're deciding what to do for new infrastructure. And we'll get into some of those next steps. So one of the key pieces of context is our flood risk reduction strategy. This was an effort that came out of a task force that went on for about 9 months in 2018 and 19. And it kind of defines the way that we're going to be looking at comprehensively reducing flood risk for the city of Edina. So the two key components that we have highlighted in this slide is infrastructure and outreach and engagement. This process of deciding what's going to go in the neighborhood, what people are going to have to live with, you know, is a joint purchasing decision. It's about deciding, you know, what we want our neighborhood to look like and what risks we're willing to accept. So in the infrastructure area of work, we renew our infrastructure and operate it to reduce risk. We plan public streets and parks to hold and move water to reduce the disruption of city services. In flooding, we can have serious disruption of city services. Sanitary can backflow, streets can go underwater, and we'll see some pictures of that where we predict it. The other part of the strategy is through outreach and engagement. While the city can do a lot to reduce the exposure for private properties, there's a lot that people can do on their own structures. And we're going to make flooding information available to the public and really help give residents tools so that they can be resilient to flooding. So why now? Our current engagement exercise is trying to come up with preliminary engineering for a major street reconstruction that's going to be happening in 2022 and 2023. Now, these are generational opportunities where we can go deep into a neighborhood and renew that aging infrastructure. You can see on the map here Uh, Large sections of Morningside neighborhood are going to be planned for reconstruction in 2022 and 2023. And if we were to start trying to design and decide, on the eve of those projects in 2021, that might be just too much. We needed to back this conversation up a couple of years because the choices that we'll be making in this project are significant, and we need input from the public. This is the timeline that we've shared on the Better Together site. A lot of that conversation is happening there, and we're inviting you to come out and uh, test the options that we're looking at, test all the components to the options. Tell us, where you see opportunities, where you see risk, and what trade-offs you're willing to make in the community. This is that joint decision. We're focusing right now on that fall 2020. We just gave a project update to the city council, and now we're bringing out some of these concepts to the public. This will inform our design work going forward, and it will help us narrow in on a project recommendation. So if you haven't, make sure you're taking a look at that Better Together site. A lot of the conversation and the things that we're going to be telling you about tonight are really going to be expanded in more detail, and the conversation will be ongoing for the next several months.
And Ross, if I can just jump in for a second, I would encourage everyone. I know we're streaming right now on the site, so you should be there now. If you're on YouTube, then please feel free to visit. But it's a great place where we're putting all of the information, all of the work that we've done to date lives here. It's a great way to get in touch with the project team, so specifically who's working on it, and they'll get back to you, especially if you have a question about your specific property. There's also some videos, some surveys, some really good ways to engage with the project and connect with the people doing the work. So bookmark that.
Right on. Thanks, Patty. All right, now we're going to get into the infrastructure goals. We know how to engage. Let's take a look at the goals that we're trying to meet. So the infrastructure goals, the primary goal is to safely store and move floodwaters by repairing and upgrading our aging infrastructure to share the benefits and the risks neighborhood-wide. Sub-goals are to lower the flood elevation, to reduce private property exposure, to upgrade and protect existing infrastructure to decrease exposure and vulnerability, and to prepare for increased risk caused by climate change. Now let's go into a little bit more of the context behind those. We see flood risk as a combination of the natural environment, the climate, your own individual exposure or a system's individual exposure, and its vulnerability to those floodwaters. This key equation really defines flood risk for any individual property or for whole infrastructure systems like our sanitary sewer network. We know that the two key drivers to that increasing flood risk is the climate change, where we're seeing more intense, higher peak storms, and the systems that define the exposure in the landscape are infrastructure. The infrastructure is getting old. It's technically it's obsolete. It's not meeting its service demands anymore, and the clogs and the cracks in the pipes slowly decay its ability to serve over time. So this project should be able to plan for and test what those future climate change scenarios are going to look like and how well our neighborhoods and our infrastructure can handle them, and address the public and private flooding that we see in the neighborhood. During our task force, we saw there were three key ways that a structure is susceptible to flood risk. And the one that we've been focusing on for a long time is surface water flooding. We've had maps now for half a dozen years that show where the flood risk is in the neighborhood. But then we got a little bit more in detail. We know that now that our sanitary sewer system can serve as a conduit between properties and between the public system. If that system is overwhelmed, or if a neighboring house floods, the potential for backflow to a nearby house goes up. The other one that we've seen in the recent time is groundwater. Long-term climate trends and wet years on wet years can really raise the groundwater elevation to something that we haven't seen before. And an individual property's ability to withstand that rising water is important as well. We know that our public project is primarily focused on that surface water component, but we're also going to be including some of the improvements on the sanitary system to help as well. Groundwater, we don't see a feasible way to manage, and that's generally going to be the responsibility of individual homeowners. So let's dig into the opportunity and the risk key issue areas. We've done a lot to model this neighborhood and to understand where the water pools and where the water flows. We've used a lot of new information, and we've actually taken specific neighborhood-specific flow monitoring to calibrate our models. And we've created a 2D model which can show the flow in a dynamic way. And while the maps I'm going to show tonight are static maps, we also have videos posted, and I'll give you a link to that so that you can see the dynamic model runs to really visualize how the flow times over the course of an event. We like to say that this is the best neighborhood scale flood map in the state. We're really proud of it. We're excited for the opportunities it gives us to understand the problem and to engineer ways that we can mitigate and transfer those risks. But it's still using assumptions for individual lots. So while we're showing individual lots and homes, and we feel it's good at that neighborhood scale, your lot could be off by a matter of feet. And where we don't show a risk, you might have one. Or where we show a risk on our property, it might not exist. If we get more specific information in the future, we can improve that lot by lot scale.
So Ross, if
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
understanding this correctly, then, so this model basically anticipates that during a rain event or a rainstorm, where the water will flow, where the water will pool, where you see like flooding in the street or potential flooding in houses or the ball fields or that kind of thing. And so that you can make decisions based on where you think the water is going to go. Is that kind of what we're looking at here?
Yeah, and the point for that lot by lot scale is we had to assume something about the elevations of homes based on very broad data and not specific site by site surveys. We don't have that level of information. And to get a sense for whether our options are working or not to reduce damage, we've created a damage model. And where we light up a house on the map that shows the potential for damage, that may or may not exist depending on the specific improvements at that house and the elevation of that house. We had to make an assumption. So when we show individual homes in these things, it's probably not a model that's going to get down to that level right now until we get some of that information in there.
And also just to clarify, I know a lot of us are familiar with the FEMA flood maps, and this is different, right? This is more specific to this neighborhood and is a little bit different data. It doesn't affect the same kind of flood insurance, that kind of thing, but just is more for informational purposes as we look to figure out some proposed ways forward, right?
That's right. Yeah, the Weber Pond area is a FEMA body, but the areas upstream of that are not. These are local flooding areas that you're not going to see on those FEMA maps.
Okay, so we're just talking about two different things, and I want to make sure people understand that. Yeah, thanks.
So we've learned a lot about what's possible here. The extent of the surface overflows we were blind to those issues in the past. So this is new for us. We have a deep appreciation of the scale and interconnectedness of the problem, We know that we can try to, really squeeze down on one area, but then the balloon pops up in another. The interrelatedness of this issue across the neighborhood is we're getting a good feel for that. Um, being high means being dry. There's no substitute for that elevation, and in a low area, that opportunity for creating new areas for storage to reduce flood exposure to homes is really narrow. And sometimes the pipe systems, they can carry some, but they are limited because of their flat grades and because of you know, the, just the physical space we have to work with. And the value of those planned land overflows is high. So as we orient you to some of these issues, we're going to work our way upstream. We're going to start in Weber Park. Then we're going to go to the low areas between Monterey and Grimes. We're going to look at some of the steep flow paths on Crocker, Grimes, and then up into some landlocked areas on Branson. Now there's areas outside of these specific areas that also have flood risk. So far we've focused on kind of the skeleton of our system. These are the key storage areas and the major flow paths in our network. We wanted to just have a block diagram to kind of show it. We've got some major west to east pipes and surface conveyances. We've got some steep north-south flow paths based on the topography out there. We've got some existing storage in water and existing storage on land. So we're going to step through some of these areas downstream to upstream now. The flood risk that we see in Weber along 42nd Street and along France Avenue, where Weber Pond is essentially spilling over its banks and into private property. Avail Academy has some flood risk because it's down in the low area. And some of the areas south of 40th Street essentially see overflow through our pipe systems from Weber Pond. Weber Park itself, near the skating rinks and the structure, sees flooding, and we see surface overflows actually flow through Avail from Grimes Avenue east to Weber Pond. Moving to the low areas between Monterey and Grimes, we've got an existing temporary inundation area between Lynn and Kipling. And here you can see that spills over its banks as well and floods the nearby roads, getting up to structures on both sides. There's also the Susan Lindgren School, which the park floods with Monterey Avenue. And then these significant surface overflows. The water gets so high in these areas that it actually tries to find an overflow path, and it goes between homes, into backyards, and between homes again, and into working its way to the east. And this is our 100-year event, and this is a very significant event. This isn't something that we see on a frequent basis, but this is maybe something that we would have seen during the 87 storm event, depending on what land use was there at the time.
Russ, when you mentioned a 100-year event,
Yeah.
what kind of rain totals are you talking about, and what time frame or what time period?
Yeah, we're talking about a 24-hour event that's about 7.5 inches of rain over that 24 hours. It comes really intense during the peak, 5 minutes or 30 minutes, but over the course of the day, it would be 7.5 inches.
So what's an idea, just to give a little bit of context or perspective? A regular rain event would only be a couple inches, maybe.
Yeah, no two rain events are exactly alike. Yeah, we might normally see a couple inches here and there. You're going to see that every year. Something over about maybe 2.7, 2.8 inches, you might see on an every other year basis. So those recurrence intervals, the 100-year event, is actually better known as the 1% probability event. So you got a 1 out of 100 chance of getting that 7.5 inches. But you might have a 1 out of or 2 out of 100 chance, or 1 out of 50 chance to see maybe 6.5 inches. So the levels of probability, the more unlikely it is, the higher the rainfall events.
So we're not talking about just a typical summer thunderstorm or something. It's a lot of rain in a short amount of time where it can't get absorbed into the ground.
Yeah,
And
and
so
while
it
we're
has to
showing
go
the
somewhere.
1% probability events today, we're going to have in our reports and in our future presentations, we're going to be showing, you know, the 4% probability, the 25%, the 5-year event, the 20% probability. So we're going to be showing a variety of different scales so that people can get comfortable with what the risk is now and how well our infrastructure options can address it.
Thanks.
So moving upstream now to Grimes and Crocker, these steep flow paths. Uh, the project team wants me to let you know that the picture on the right side is not the city of Edina, but it's an example of the engineer's nightmare of what can happen when you have a very steep street with a steep flow path. This is an example from a big storm up in Duluth several years ago. But we see a lot of, in our model, we see a lot of flow directed down some of these steep streets. And with that LiDAR data, the elevations show the potential for bypass flow, where water would either pool or flow so deeply in the street that it could jump over a driveway, or it could jump over a low area and down into private property. So this is something that we definitely want to understand so that we can address it when we're designing those streets for flow. Moving further upstream to the Branson area, here we have that same potential for overflow from a low pooled area into backyards and into locally landlocked areas.
So Ross, this area, just to orient us, the Branson area, what are those major streets there? You're looking at Morningside Road.
Morningside Road on the top, 44th Street on the bottom, and then Grimes and Branson.
Okay, thanks.
So as I mentioned, that these all of these models are available. The model runs for existing at least are available, and we made a tiny URL for Morningside flood videos 2020 MFV, and here you can see anything up from the 5% or the 5-year event all the way up to the 100-year event for different areas of town and in more detail. We've already had some residents and builders engaging with these things to understand their risk, and we're available to have specific conversations to help you kind of decode them and to learn more about the risk if you so choose. So now we're going to pivot to infrastructure choices. And I've got 2 slides right off the bat to start to put some of these bigger picture infrastructure choices in context. And the first one is about the scale of the infrastructure choices that we're looking at here. We're thinking infrastructure in a way that is much more than the status quo. The status quo for this area would be replacing the pipes in kind, maybe making amendments to make it work better in the future. But that level of investment for all of the infrastructure in the neighborhood might be in the neighborhood of $2 million. So a significant investment, and investment that continues the service that is currently provided by the neighborhood and extends that infrastructure its next life cycle. We looked at a doubling, and a doubling again of those. And this is not a typical level of investment, but it's one that starts to give us the ability to test out solutions or to test out options that can really start to affect those larger storms. So our upgrade option, our go big option, and go bigger, we're the combined option that we'll show here is up in that go bigger range, where there's 2 doublings to get up to that level of $8 million investment, or about $12,000 per lot in Morningside. Now we know that the how to pay questions and those are going to come later, and right now all funds are stormwater utility, and the current stormwater utility could not support this level of investment. This is also, there's special assessments in the neighborhood, and those are for all the other utilities that are going to be happening. Or sorry, those are for the streets, and then the utility funds, the sanitary uh, and water utilities will be paying for the upgrades of all those. So we know that those two projects coming up are going to have significant investment in some of these ranges. This is just for the storm utility specifically. So,
And Russ, just to go back to that,
okay.
what you're talking about with the investment is it's not necessarily a bill that an individual homeowner is going to receive, but the investment that the city is looking to make on a per property basis. Is that fair?
That's right. Although the street projects do come with special assessments, these are currently not funded out of the special assessments. They're funded out of the utility fees.
So the bill I get every month from the city for my storm and sanitary work, that's the fund that we're talking about here.
Right. But we know we have these issues citywide, and we want to make sure that there's a business case to go to this level of effort, because we know we're going to have to we're up the game for the rest of the city as well. These issues aren't just in Morningside, they're citywide.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just thought, if I were watching this, I want to make sure that I'm not going to get a bill in the mail from the city for $12,000.
Yeah. Right. Well, you may for the
street
normal special assessment for the street portion, and that's a discussion that we're really kicking off next year and the year after, the years before the individual designs for the neighborhoods. But these are specific to storm.
And I also think it's interesting, and tell me if I'm wrong here too, that the fees that everyone is paying in every month, that's going into, it's sort of a self-sustaining model to invest in the infrastructure. So you're not only paying for the service, but you're paying for the future of the service. And this is how you're investing that money and looking at areas like this that need extra investment, right?
Yeah. The engineers, we call that our capital program, the rebuild, and then the operations is the other part you're paying for.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
So now, as we step through these infrastructure choices, we're going to look at it kind of on a component by component basis, and then we'll show you what we put together for the combined option. Focusing on, the individual strategy, we've got storage and then flow paths. So storage is where the water can pool, and the idea is to make those bigger to find more room so that we can lower the flood elevations in those storage areas. The flow paths, we talked about some of the surface overflows already, but the pipes underground as well. We look at making those larger so that they can convey more water. And then the individual vulnerability reductions. What can we do when we can't engineer the water to go lower? How do we make sure that the structures and infrastructure systems can actually stand up to the flow or the amount of water or holding water? So for storage, we're going to be looking at land, existing water and land options. For flow paths, we're looking at pipes and surface flows. And then for vulnerability reductions, both public systems and private systems. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the costs, benefits, opportunities, and trade-offs of each. So starting with existing water options. We have existing opportunities at Weber Park, at Weber Pond, and at the Lynn and Kipling inundation area. The idea here is we tested it in our model. Can we make those bigger? Can we expand them? And the figure on the right shows some of the options that we can work through when we have existing water. So expanding a pond, potentially lowering the outlet elevation so that it holds more water further down in the landscape. Maybe even predictably pumping it out before an event to make room for floodwaters. Or if we can't hold it below the elevation of homes, can we intercept it and create some sort of a flood wall? So generally, the in-water options have low relative costs, but pretty high for flood walls. We see good flood benefit for these options. but the trade-offs are significant. It includes the loss of land if you have a park nearby, if you have existing trees on the area, and if you're behind one of those walls, you can lose the view. Opportunities, you could see improved habitats, or it could be part of a greater park development. We have a couple of, or some examples of what the flood walls might look like. And we figure we're going to have to show better what this would actually look like. So this is going to be part of the design team's mission over the next month, is to give you examples of what this might look like. Flood walls being one, but then, where would we put the water? What would it look like? I mean, we know what ponds look like, but what can they look like in their revised configuration? Now we'll move on to land storage. We know we have opportunities here at Weber Park, the new Weber Woods, and then Susan Lingen School and Vale Academy both have land area in these lowers. Generally, our options here on the figure that we show is you can, if you have some existing storage on land, you can lower that land and expand the area for storage, or you could just wholesale create a pond to get down to that water elevation and provide the most storage. The flood wall example we won't go over again, but that's an option in these land areas as well. The costs are medium relative to the grading, and again, the costs are high for flood walls. Here we see another good flood benefit. These are some of our best opportunities for storing flood water. But again, they come with significant trade-offs. You lock up that land, you have potentially trade-offs to the existing uses like the sports fields, and it's going to limit the use of that land. You can't put a structure there in the future. It's going to be harder to reconfigure it if you have a dream for a different use.
So Russ,
Here's an example.
Oh, okay. When you're talking about the building a pond, and I know there's a lot of design work and specifics and all of that to be sorted, so these are just sort of high-level concepts. Would that be something that would exist all the time and then would just fill up more during a flooding event? Or would it be kind of a hole in the ground that fills up when it rains?
Yeah, so that's really going to depend on the level of scale. For the example, or for the option that we chose, we really wanted to test out, what really creating a lot of storage could buy us. Is it really going to provide a good benefit? So in our combined option right now, we bring whole land areas all the way down to a pond. But that's not necessarily the solution that is going to generate public support. So we're going to look at some options in between. But for right now, the combined option is essentially fully maximizing all the storage. It provides good benefit for nearby homes, but we really want to make sure we test out the trade-offs and see what trade-offs we're willing to make.
So right now you're just exploring every possible option to see where you could put the water in and how, and then what the costs are, and then we're going to ask the community how they feel about it, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So some of these options definitely seem a different scale than what we're normally used to. So this is an example, I think near our Lewis Fields, where this is a temporary pond over a sporting facility. This could go away in a day. For our options, we've shown extensive grading and pond expansion. So here's, as far as we were able to get with without impacting, a grove of trees and tennis courts, basketball and play structures. But other than that, we show extensive grading just to test, how much this storage can get us. Neighborhood wide, we expand that up into Weber Woods, significantly deepening the Lynn and Kipling inundation area, and even making some use on the Susan Lindgren site. Now we'll pivot again to the underground storage. So this is something that we have very limited use of in our model or in our combined option, but this is an alternative to some of those land lowering activities, and this is storage. So here we have another kind of cross-section cut that shows a park area, and then some sort of an underground pipe system that would be able to store water underground. The opportunity is at parks or parking lots. It has a very high relative cost and a medium relative benefit. You can't store quite as much under there because of the structures you need to put. The trade-offs means you're still locking up that land, but you could still have relatively unimpacted active play on the surface. Here's an example from one of the firms that creates these precast structures, and then an installation of those. And an example from St. Paul's Prospect Park neighborhood, where they have underground storage and an above ground park where water can, first fill up some land area and then cascade down into the underground structures.
So this isn't in Prospect Park where this is built. The main idea is to hold the water underground, but it can rise above into this kind of rain garden-y park area.
Yeah, here I think they split the difference in a little bit different way. They first put the water above ground to make it a feature, and then they start cascading it down, but it could be the opposite.
This is how two of those options might work together. Then it's a combination solution, or not a solution, but a way to move some of the water around.
All right. And again, this is the design team's challenge, is to show what this might look like in our specific area. Right now, our models just we start carving it up, but we don't have a good sense for the trade-offs and how it actually looks. But we'll get there. Stormwater infrastructure. So this is the storage and flow paths. So we know that we can pool water on streets. The existing pipe system can be made bigger to more water. The benefits are good for transferring risk downstream. In some of our options, this can solve issues or really reduce flood risks and flood exposure on the upstream areas, but it comes at the cost of trading those risks and putting them downstream. So our combined option, for the benefits that the flood storage was able to provide us in the low areas, this one can solve some of the areas upstream. It's got a low relative benefit for storage, and it's got a medium benefit for the flow paths. And the trade-offs include all the conflicts in the right-of-way and the need to mitigate that risk if we're transferring risk downstream. A couple examples of what that looks like from our 58th Street project that's ongoing right now. On the left side, we've got some planned surface storage in streets, where during a big event, it pools there for a period of several hours, and then underground storage and infiltration on the right. There's not a lot of trade-offs to be made on the right, but those things come at a premium cost. So you get a lot less of it for your dollar. Now on the flow paths, when we see those steep street areas, just like we can plan these areas for storage, we also have to plan them for flow. This isn't something that we've really done actively in our past projects, but we understand that from seeing those new models and risks, that it's something we're going to have to be planning for in the future. So we have the opportunities here on the steep flow paths and areas with that bypass flow, or that overflow that I described. It's a low or medium relative cost for the flow paths, and it's got a good flood benefit. I mean, if we can prevent water bypassing into a private property, we can essentially remove the exposure from that flow path. Trade-offs include lowering streets and the driveway impacts that are associated with that. You could go from a very shallow driveway you play basketball on now to something steeper if our street dropped a couple feet. And the associated utility impacts from that, if we really have to drop the street in an area, can be significant. The last one is the vulnerability reductions. So your system can serve as a conduit for flood risk among homes. If you feel like you might be high and dry now, but your neighbor isn't, you should probably be considering the risk of the sanitary sewer line backup. In our public system, we're going to be making investments to line the sanitary sewers, to rehab the manholes or to replace them, uh, to flood-proof or relocate lift stations that are and to armor some of those high flow paths in the streets. That'll make the public infrastructure a lot more resilient so that it can resist those flood forces and have less effect to the nearby private properties. But even if we did everything and we had a perfect sanitary sewer system, it still would have the risk of backup. And that's because of all of the private service connections and all the basements that are connected to these. So individuals can take uh, vulnerability reducing measures, such as lining their own sewer service, preventing backflow from the line with a backflow preventer, or raising their sanitary sewer in their basement with an overhead sanitary sewer service. We've got an example, and we go into a lot of detail on fact sheets at the edinamn.gov/flooding, and those are things that people can start looking at and planning for right now if they see risk on their property. We see a lot of, some of these come with significant costs to both public and private, but they really do have good benefit. And the trade-offs are, both the costs and the construction impacts.
That's a good reminder, Russ. The city maintains the larger system, but that private homeowners own the connection to the main line from their house and
That's right.
so the maintenance, and so that's what you're talking about, is that preventative maintenance of your own line from your house to the main line in the middle of the street is something that you can kind of take proactive measures on.
Right. Yeah, you want to make sure that that is, in good working condition and leak free. That's going to help out you and everyone else on the system. And then just the general basement practices and other things that we have on that flood proofing or on the edinamn.gov flooding site that give you a lot of ideas on how to reduce your own vulnerability. All right, so now we've looked at several components of the options that we're considering. We've talked about some of the trade-offs. We just wanted to ground you again in kind of our stick figure diagram. And then this is going to lead into an example of some of the model runs in the existing versus proposed benefits that we're going to be seeing from some of these potential solutions. So in our combined option, first we modeled a bunch of storage that did pretty good for the low areas. We modeled a bunch of bigger pipes that did some good for some of the high areas. But each one of those options, either didn't solve the other or transferred more risks downstream and caused, more issues downstream. So we tried to combine that's additional storage and the additional larger pipes and more flow to balance that that benefit around the neighborhood. And we took full use of some of these low areas, which comes with significant impacts again. And those conversations about what impacts we're willing to see and which areas we see for the most opportunity are really what we're going to be trying to discuss with the neighborhood going forward in the next several months. And all the input that is going to be coming in is going to help us provide a good base of decision to say, here's where what the neighborhood could buy into, or here's what they can't, where they see value and where they don't. So to orient you now to the existing conditions model, what you're seeing here is the 25-year event, or the 4% probability per year event. And this is showing the neighborhood. And again, remember we talked about the model itself being good on a neighborhood scale, but maybe not so good on a home scale. We're showing, kind of an existing condition risk from lowest to highest in that light red to red color. And then we're showing inundation depth. So this option uses bigger pipes, uses bigger storage, does some predictively pumping, and it carves some brand new overflows where they don't exist. The cost is large at that 8 million, and it has extensive trade-offs. As I flip to the next slide, this is the existing condition. I'll flip back and forth between them. We're going to be sending out and linking to studies in the next several weeks that show all the storms from 5-year all the way up to 100-year, from the 20% probability event to the 1% probability event. And we'll be able to kind of cycle between those. But this is just one snapshot of the benefits for a very big option. We have a variety of different options that we explored, and those will all be available upcoming. Here's what it looks like on the 25-year event with the proposed model. So the major changes as we kind of click back and forth between these two options that you'll see, the 41st Street right-of-way, we've actually cut a channel in that to reduce those flows that are between Monterey and Grimes, between the homes. And you can see if you focus on that area that we're actually able to, not eliminate, but reduce the amount of flooding right next to homes and adjacent to them. We make full use of the storage, and we really deepen the storage at the temporary inundation area. You can see the depth really change, and it stays within its banks, but it still gets out onto Kipling Avenue and a little bit onto Lynn in that 25-year event. We've actually cut overflows through private property between Kipling and Grimes and along the 41st Street corridor. We know that that's not something we control right now, and that would take individual conversations with neighborhoods. Sorry. And we've actually stored water in the park at Weber Park, and we've used some storage at that Susan Lindgren School. The upstream areas along Grimes and Crocker, we've definitely reduced those flood shapes back and forth. But some areas that were outside of those core areas of our system remain unchanged. So this gives a sense for a very large combined option with both pipes and storage. And we as engineers and technical folks are still learning, how to optimize these options. But the one key ingredient we don't have right now is, where the public is willing to make trade-offs and what trade-offs they're willing to make. And that's the conversation we're hoping to get going. So we'll kind of conclude this review of at least one of the options and one of the storms and all the components. And maybe, Patty, we'll be moving on to live Q&A.
Thanks. That was some really good information. It sounds like it's a complicated problem, but you guys have done a lot of work and research to come up with what you think the best proposals for the most impact and the most responsible cost are. So with that information, the next steps for us will be to take that out in the community, get some feedback from you out in public spaces or online. You can definitely contact the project team on the Better Together site. And especially if you have questions about your individual property or want to get maybe somebody from this project team to speak with you or come out to your property, those are things I believe that you're offering, correct, Ross?
That's right. Yep, we want to get some.
We want to hear your stories, right? And we want to know how it impacts you specifically, because it is a computer model, and we want to know the human impacts of that work. So continue to engage with us that way. There'll be more to come. But for now, we appreciate those of you who have been commenting on YouTube Live and on the project webpage where we're streaming this meeting. And we're going to get into those questions now. And then we'll follow up that conversation. We'll keep those comments open so that you can share with your neighbors, or if other things come up for you, we'll continue to respond there and keep the dialogue going. So with that, we'll move into some of our questions. Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Patty. I think we're having some technical difficulties here. Jessica, are you coming through? Nope.
Jessica, I can't hear you. Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay. We'll go ahead and introduce the team. If everyone wants to introduce themselves, we'll just go around the table here and see who's live on the meeting tonight. I'm Patty Day. I already introduced myself at the beginning of the meeting.
Ross Bittner, Engineering Services Manager with the city.
I'm Sarah Stratton. I work with Bar Engineering Company. I'm a senior water resources scientist there and overseeing this project on behalf of Bar.
And I'm Corey Anderson, also working with Sarah at Bar Engineering on this project.
All right, Jess, let's get a mic check. Can we hear you now? No. Oh no,
No.
he's our silent partner here.
Jessica's one of the lead engineers behind this work, and so she's here with us. Maybe we'll get her mic going again, but certainly her with us today. So, questions during the presentation. Somebody, as a follow-up to our conversation about private between private homeowners, sewer system, and then the larger city infrastructure, who would a resident contact for evaluation of their private home sanitary system and make recommendations for improvement?
Yeah, Patty, I think I can start with that one. We've got some resources available for self-help on the edinamn.gov/flooding page, where you can get a sense for how the systems will work and how water or sanitary might backflow into your home. I'm available, and the city utility staff are available if you have a specific issue or you want to kind of discuss the things you're seeing in our self-help things one-on-one. And then if you actually needed to go deeper to talk about what it would cost or to televise those lines, then you'd be working with a private contractor who's in the sewer and water area, and they could help you evaluate and get a sense for some of your options if you wanted to start pricing things out moving forward.
When you say televise, that's basically just a fancy way of saying putting a camera in your pipes, right?
That's right. Yeah, they use push cameras, and they use closed circuit television, and they actually video through the pipe to get a sense for whether they're in good condition or cracked up and needing repair.
And I mean, for my home, I have an older home. We try and do it once a year just to make sure, because I know those bills can be quite steep. So it's a good recommendation. All right, moving on. So where does the I think they're asking when the pond gets too full, where would that water then flow?
Maybe we can let Corey take this one. He's the one who has like his hands right on the controls of those models.
Patty, can you re-ask that question, because I only caught about half of it? Thank you.
Sure. When Weber Pond overflow to increase, where that water goes, the capacity.
What I heard was when Weber Pond overflows and gets to its capacity. Okay, so Weber Pond has one outlet, a pipe outlet that runs north, and then to the city of Minneapolis through St. Louis Park, and eventually to Bidet and McCoska. If it were to fill up completely to its capacity, its first overflow would be west to Weber Park, those sports fields, and a little bit to Weber Woods to the north. But eventually, if it got high enough, it could spill over east to France Avenue, over France to Minneapolis.
Corey, there's a second part of that question. So the question was, where does the Weber Pond overflow to, and then can that be increased?
Can the storage or the amount of overflow be increased? I guess the answer is yes to both.
So when we see our really large storm models, the pipe system quickly can't keep up. And then in the really big events, like the 1% probability event, the 41st Street right-of-way into Minneapolis would flow for like 20 some hours. Can we increase those? And I think Corey's right. Yes, we could. But we don't think it's very feasible to ask Minneapolis to accept more flood risk on their downstream system. And we looked at, both the cost of, rebuilding major street sections, really expanding that pipe, and the downstream risk to Bede-Makaska, and we don't really see a fruitful path there. So that's why we focused on a strategy of internally storing and conveying and providing additional storage in our own town.
Okay, thanks for that response. Can you hear me a little better now? Yeah, good. Okay, we're working on it. So moving forward, we had a question from a resident that says, I think the 41st Street right-of-way doesn't continue between Kipling and Grimes. And that got turned into private property some time ago. Can we just address one way or another? Corey's shaking his head, so
Yep.
affirmative.
So yeah, that question came in. I see it from Meriwether. Thank you for the question. We do right-of-way acquisition and right-of-way. We get rid of it when we don't need it, and it looks like that right-of-way was turned back to private property sometime in the late 90s. Had we known what we know now about flood risk and the need to get water west to east in that area of town, I don't think we would have given that back. We probably would have held on to it so that we would have rights to continue to do that. But that's an area where we're going to need to have specific conversations and really figure out what we can shoehorn in there. Because if we are not able to get any surface overflow west to east, the homes between Kipling and Grimes suffer some serious overflow risks from that inundation basin heading east.
Thanks, Russ. Going back to the last question, just as a clarifying point, the resident asked about outflow to the north of Weber Pond. Is that any different as far as the overflow and increasing the capacity there? Is that resonating with either of you?
No.
And maybe we can follow, you know what, we're gonna, just as a point of order, we are gonna collect all of the questions that people are asking during this forum, and we'll give a more comprehensive answer, and we'll post more on Better Together Morningside flooding page, so that if there is a little bit more we need to find out from you, or that research we need to do, we can definitely keep that dialogue going. So that page will remain open just in case anybody feels like they need a little bit more after the meeting.
Right. I think the other point of order would be if you need to reply to an individual, you can always reply to your own thread. So if you create a new thread on the same topic, then we can. So now I'm seeing it now. So the capacity of the outflow to the north, that would be the pipe overflow from that conversation we were just having. And yeah, we looked at both, not just the surface overflow, but the pipe overflow. Tried to get a sense for the modeled flow in both of them.
All right, thanks.
And
I think we have, oh, go ahead.
Just to reiterate a little of what Ross said earlier, to add to that is, yes, from an engineering perspective, we could make that pipe bigger. But as Ross pointed out, Minneapolis is not missing flooding problems. They have some of their own, and to just send more water down that way to relieve flooding around Weber Pond is just really not an option. So it, in a sense, yes, but not really. Just making a bigger pipe out of Weber Pond is truly an option.
Thanks, Corey. It sounds like maybe Jessica got her headset issue figured out, so welcome, Jessica.
Thanks.
Awesome. I also wanted to clarify, I think earlier in the presentation, we were talking about one of the potential options, Ross, with the rain garden park feature. I referred to it as Prospect Park, but it's really from Tower Side is the example we were showing. So just fact checking ourselves in real time here, folks.
Yeah, right.
Okay, moving on. There's a specific question, but we're just going to kind of keep it higher level here tonight to make it, protect privacy and just make sure that we're answering just the higher level questions here. But the map that you showed with the houses shown in red at highest risk, that's an accurate, up-to-date model, correct? And how often are you looking at those?
But that one comes with that big asterisk we talked about in the presentation. And I think I can't state this enough where, to be able to test these options before and after, we had to understand damage and quantify it in some way. And to do that, we had to assume something about elevations. So we used essentially an aerial photo and the shapes of the houses, and we overlaid that with a 2011 LiDAR data set. And what LiDAR is a plane flies over and it just shoots down some lasers or light beams, and then it counts how long it takes to get back. So it creates an elevation map of the town. Now, those elevation maps have generally been really good, but sometimes they're off, especially in areas where you have tree cover or steep slopes. So we're making both an assumption about where your house is based on an aerial photo and a not incredibly survey accurate data set. So your home elevation in our model may be off by several feet in either direction. And we had to light some houses up. So if you see your house and it's at the level 5 or the really red risk, we generally wanted to make these things good for that neighborhood scale. But we're going to need more specific survey information. And we do have some survey files that we could dig into from individual homes, but those are the types of conversations we want to have one-on-one with residents. And maybe we can find a way to put the asterisks all over that sheet to make sure that it's for use with neighborhood scales, but not down to the individual home.
So, Ross, if I were a homeowner and I saw my house on that map in red, I have some questions and concerns clearly. What would you, if you were advising those people, what would you suggest that they do?
Right. Or if you see the homes near you in red and you know that you're around the same area, but you're not, we can get specific about and give you information about the flood risk elevation. If you have a current survey comparing the floor elevations or the opening elevations with the elevations on our flood risk model, is a very prudent thing to do. That's something that happens at development and redevelopment projects. So if you've ever done something that needs a permit, you've probably already done that. But then, if you get into the point where either you're in or you think you're close, then you start looking at, how well could my house actually withstand water that's standing for a while or comes up quickly? Do I have a plan? And there we've got the edinamn.gov/flooding site is chock full of different practical options for you to think about to prepare for flooding.
Excellent. They could also contact a member of the Edina project team on that Morningside flooding page, correct? And you could make sure that they have the information or be able to share their experiences. I also just want to plug that site again, where you're watching this meeting, because we're still asking people for feedback and we want to hear your experiences. So there's surveys on there. There's an ideas tab. Share your ideas with us, share your stories, share your pictures. If you have some great flooding pictures, it all helps us to put it together and make a better record and make a better recommendation going forward. So that's a place that we want to hear from you. It's going to continue to be live. We're going to keep putting stuff on there, but this is just, we're just going to keep checking in with you, but please go there if you have anything to add. All right, moving on. We have another question about whether the city of Edina still owns the Susan Lindgren land area west of Monterey. Can we speak to that, or is that something that we need to follow up on?
I can speak to that question as well. So both the Avail Academy and the Susan Lindgren School were included in some of the planning that we've done. And I approached both organizations myself to essentially start that conversation. The Susan Lindgren School is a little bit more gray, where there's sections of old right-of-way, but generally that is all owned by the St. Louis Park School District. So anything that would happen there or at the Avail Academy would both be subject to the approval of those bodies, and it could only happen with their permission.
Okay, that's really good to know. Thanks. All right, so if you have questions, keep them coming. We've got a lot of great experts here live tonight that we can pass them to, but we'll just we'll keep the conversation going for now. So we talked about, there's a lot of different ideas. I know you guys have thrown everything at the wall to see what we can do. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, Russ, about solutions versus mitigation, or is this a problem that's going to be solved entirely 100%, or is this just something that we will continually improve? I guess maybe you can offer your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think Sarah and Corey might be able to add on to this too, because they're a lot more versed in what it took to get to the combined option that we have now. But yeah, generally when we think about flooding and infrastructure, we design it to a certain service level. And I always used to say we design it to fail, which is true, but generally my bosses don't like me to use the F word. So, but how do you fail safe? How does something get overwhelmed and the capacity is overwhelmed in a way that at least we understand and we can prepare for, or it doesn't cause an immediate hazard or harm. So I don't think we're ever going to solve flooding, but we can do a lot better job of managing the risks and understanding the risks. And then for the ones that we're not willing to pay our way out of, we're going to have to figure out how to accept them and then how to modify our activities around them.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's just important as we talk about what we can do, just right-sizing expectations. And then also you mentioned climate change. There are a lot of variables here that we don't have control over. So just want to bring that point up a bit again. There's a question, and maybe we can talk about this generally too, about homes in the neighborhood, redevelopment, homes getting torn down, that kind of thing. When that happens and the plans are proposed to the city, is this issue looked at in consideration of those plans? And is the city looking to ban construction in certain areas? Is that an ongoing conversation? Maybe you can speak to that.
Right. So you remember early on in the slide deck, we talked about the 4 major areas of work the city has. The 2 that we're focusing on for this project are the engagement of the public and the public public infrastructure, the stormwater utility. This question seems to get a little bit more towards one of those other areas of work, which is our regulatory environment. And the regulatory side is a very effective one for getting homes out of flood risk, but it's only those homes that are subject to redevelopment. So when a home is rebuilt or a major remodel is considered, the builders and homeowners come into the city for a permit, and they're looking at our flood risk maps on a regular basis. They're making plans for how to get their homes up and out of the flood risk, or for those areas that aren't going to be rebuilt, how do they reduce their own vulnerability? So yeah, the question asks about a specific home, and I guess I don't have a sense for that, but yeah, I know redevelopment is a big deal in the neighborhood, but we see it as a dual-edged sword. It holds a lot of opportunity for, reducing the flood risk, but it also holds a lot of, it changes the nature of the space, and it's a long construction project, and it has a variety of other construction impacts. So the two things that, if I were next door to a home, the two things that I would be hoping for the flood side is, I know that they're not going to be, flooding their basement and causing more potential for sanitary backflow to my home. And oftentimes those new structures are built with modern foundation systems and sump pumps. And while the sump pumps can be troublesome and we have to make sure we route them correctly, that also helps the groundwater situation for my foundation. So it's definitely a mixed bag.
Is there any budget that the city has right now about site acquisition? Is that a city policy that exists today?
No, I don't think we have anything written down on that, but I think it's one of the last opportunities that we'd want to take.
Right. Another user asked, will residents be able to discharge some lines into the sewer system, and all of the options that you discussed as being considered?
Which sewer?
I don't know.
So that's an important question. I like that one. You can never dump it into the sanitary sewer system. That's illegal. So if you or your neighbor has a connection from a sump pump directly into a sanitary sewer system, let me know about it. We can figure out how to get you disconnected from that. That's something that could cause risk to neighboring private properties. The storm sewer system, on the other hand, yeah, we encourage water to be released from sump pumps into there. In the older areas without any sump drain lines, directly to the curb is the preference, or to the front yard draining to the curb. That can cause all sorts of nuisance issues. So with our street reconstruction projects, we add a sump drain line that is available for connection, and it's usually 3 feet behind the curb and a couple feet deep. And it's available so that you could run a line or to discharge directly to there. We've got guidance on our website on how to properly connect, takes a permit, and how your sump pump should exit your home to be aware of frost issues during the winter time. So definitely take a peek at some of those resources, and if you don't find them readily with some Google searches, give me a call, or we can put the link up afterwards.
All right, well, I learned something. Thanks, Ross. I don't have a sump pump, just to be clear. So this next one's I think a really good clarifying question about the price of the different options. There was a lot of variance there, right? And some were quite expensive. But this work is being tied in with a future road reconstruction project that was scheduled to happen already. So I think what I understand is that you are taking advantage of that opportunity. So the street is only torn up once. If we're going to do something there, we're going to do it now. So can you talk about, just again, to clarify the difference between the street assessment work and fees, and then the sewer work that's related to that, and how those two function together?
Yes, yeah, we had some back and forth during the presentation on that, but I think that's a good point for clarification again. Uh, so the sanitary sewer, the water utility, and the storm sewer are all utility funded, and those are your monthly or sorry, your quarterly bill. Um, the funds that those utilities generate during a reconstruction project, those utilities funds pay for all the improvements, the capital plan. So the assessment or the special assessment that comes when uh, we're doing the road projects. So we've got that map that showed the 2021 and or sorry, the 2022 and 2023 road projects. The road itself and the grading in the base underneath it, those are items that are paid for through special assessments. We wouldn't see that this project would affect those special assessments at all, and uh, the but it would work with those projects so that there's an efficiency of scale. So to the extent that we're working in the same right-of-way area, or we have a contract um, that is building near that area, we would foresee rolling some of these recommended improvements for stormwater into those two projects. Um, to the extent that there's some overlap there, you could see some minor savings to the greater project amounting to a reduction in special assessments, but that is very minor because some of these areas have some really tough soils, and it would just mean a little bit less correction for the road if we've already built up for a pipe underneath.
Thanks for that, Ross. Yeah, so the street assessment that goes with the road reconstruction is its own special thing that's happening, and there'll be conversations with the city. They'll come out and they'll give you on that. Then this work is just taking the opportunity to get in there at the same time and be paid for with a different mechanism. So yeah, I think it's really important to know that the funds that you're talking about, Ross, are distributed citywide to that infrastructure. So right now you're focusing on this specific neighborhood because there's such a need, but it's coming out of a citywide funding mechanism.
Yeah, right. So yeah, none of it comes for free. You're paying for it all, but so is the rest of you're paying over time rather than one time.
And then you'll move to another area and another area.
Yeah, infrastructure gets old and eventually it needs a little bit of rehab.
Right.
Medina was built in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and it's all kind of coming due at the same time.
All right. Let's see. There's another question here about this resident says that houses on both sides of them have been built and significant fill has been added during the construction. The sump pumps put in there were helpful, but this person would like to add grade to their property and is concerned about adding fill without messing with what's already going on with the flooding. And do you have some advice?
Yeah, so that's really going to depend on where you are, whether a fill can be added. So, generally, if you just wanted to do some grading work in your yard, if you're over 10 cubic yards of material, it would take a grading permit. And we review those grading permits for these type of issues of flow and flooding. So if you're in one of those overflow paths, or if maybe you have a landlocked basin in the backyard, or um, there might be some restrictions. But generally, um, you're available to grade. If you're not redeveloping, you're kind of limited by your own home and where its foundation levels are. So if you look at the side of your house and you see, some concrete, generally, fill on concrete is okay on the foundation walls. But when you get up into the wood part of the structure, you wouldn't want to be filling over that. Um, uh, Generally, grading drainage issues are solved better by cutting fill out and creating a nice flow path downstream. So consulting with drainage experts or the city. We would provide technical support if people want to talk about a specific issue. And I find a lot of times that people, have an idea that they want to build up when what really is asked for is, cutting down to direct that flow better.
All right, and you said 10 cubic yards of dirt?
Yep.
That's a lot of dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a decent amount. Okay, just wanted to clarify that. All right, we've got another comment from a YouTube viewer. How does the city interact with the builders to be more water removal conscious? For instance, having downspouts directed to rain gardens or deep into the groundwater table. Is there conversations happening with developers or contractors right now at the city?
Right. Yeah, I feel like I'm taking all these fun ones. We're not getting a lot of technical questions. Sorry, team. I'm gonna go again on this one. So yeah, we're having daily conversations with builders. We're talking with them all the time. Um, when it really depends on the level of activity that they're planning. What sort of how deep we're getting into that conversation. But we're talking about issues of grading and drainage. Um, on multiple permits per day. Hundreds and hundreds per year. Um, I think if you have a more specific follow up on a home near you, give me a call, or I can help get you over to someone in our building or our planning side on all the associated requirements. But generally, all of the grading and drainage stuff happens out of our department in engineering. So give me a call and we can look at specifics.
All right. We also got to thank you for the conversation, talking to residents. So I want to share that with the team because I do think that's important. This conversation has been going on all summer. Maybe some of you have been out to Weber Park and seen the interactive exhibit, and we'll be out there, still yet. We want to make sure this is something that works for the city residents and is palatable and comes up with the best possible outcome. I also thought maybe it would be interesting to share that the council is involved in this process as well and has been updated in real time. Had a work session just 2 days ago to get the same information so that they can guide this work as well, because it will take some investment. Okay? But there's been a lot of technical work, to Ross's point, done to get here, a lot of modeling, a lot of engineer stuff that they can really get into with you if you want. But there are a few options. The next steps, I think that's a good place to kind of steer the conversation these last few minutes is what happens now. So you've done the research, we've done some community engagement, we've come up with some potential ways forward. Where do we take this now?
Right. So the project timeline has us after we're bringing this out, and I don't see this meeting as the end. Normally we'll get a couple dozen people watching live, but about 5 times that number are going to come to this conversation after the fact, and we'll watch the videos after the fact. So we want to, not just the questions that we received today, we want to continue to see discussion and questions on that site. And as we talked about today, the individual components of the design, and then one example of the combined option. Our challenge as a team is to really visualize what that combined option looks like, and get that final report out to you so that you can review it. And over the next 2 months, as we're getting comments back in from people on what trade-offs they're willing to make, we'll be starting to make revisions to that combined option. Maybe make some different options to it, a smaller version of it, the bigger version of it, some shades of gray in between. if we hear more about specific areas, if we're addressing say the flood walls with the people who would have to live right next to a flood wall, or some of those overflow channels on the 41st Street right away, or the road lowering, we're gonna spend some time to really visualize what those individual areas look like. So keep checking back on our site so that you can see your issue that you're most concerned about in a little bit more detail. And then tell us what you think, because everything that we hear during this process is going to help us create that next option, that combined option. And you mentioned the council. This effort was preceded by our flood risk reduction task force. And that task force, they really did get a good sense for the scale of this issue citywide. And climate change is really, it's given us a huge challenge for flooding for a first ring suburb. We want to make sure that this is scalable to the rest of the city. And that was the big challenge that that council set out is, we're going to use the Morningside neighborhood as a focal geography, as a focus area, because we know we have a big opportunity there. But what are we going to learn in this area that's going to help us out to solve it in the many other areas of the city? We've got to figure out a better way to manage that risk and get ourselves out of this situation where we're exposed to so much flood risk to a level that's more tolerable, because the current level just isn't.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. So residents can look forward to more opportunities to weigh in. The Better Together site will have a survey that we're going to put up specific to these options that are being put forward, and we'll be on the community more. There'll be more iterations of design and more engineering work done behind the scenes with kind of proposal early spring, March timeline, possibly around that time. But just keep checking back on the website. There's a lot more to come in this work. So I just wanted to give the team a couple minutes here. If there's anything that you think we didn't touch on that was important, or you want to reiterate before we close.
Thanks, Patty. Just one last thing too about the Better Together page. So there's all those forums there to make your public comments. If you want to email or just call us up, we're really open to that too. And then we also will come out. So if you're like, I really just want to show you what I've got here in my backyard, I think you need to see this. We want to see it. So give us a call. We're happy to schedule appointments, social distance, physically distant with masks and taking the proper precautions and coming out and really getting a sense for what you're seeing out there and what you really value about your space. So we welcome your feedback in any form that suits the way that you want to provide it to us.
Excellent. Thanks, Jessica. All right, anyone else from the team?
I noticed that there's all these questions that we've been taking and answering in this in the live stream. They're going to be available in the comments section, and we'll take some time to reply to all of them in the next couple days. And then that's the same place that we're going to be seeing comments come in from people who are watching this not live, but after the fact. So you can keep checking back in on that conversation to see other people's thoughts and the questions they're asking. On some of the ones that got specific, we'll give you a general answer, but then when it comes to specific properties and some of the specific issues, we'll make sure that the things that are better handled in a one-on-one conversation happen there, but get the amount of information that's appropriate back out to the public on the type of question or the type of problem.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ross. So we will leave the comments open. Staff will respond to them, but continue to ask your questions. We'll continue to respond. And this meeting will be posted there too. So in case anyone wants to see it, we'll have it there. It'll be on the City of Edina YouTube channel also.
Yeah, help us
So
share.
with that, yeah, rate, share, review, all that good stuff. So we want to get to as many people as we can. So we appreciate your help in talking to your neighbors about this work. All right, with that, we're at time. So thank you all for joining us, for spending your time with us, for your really excellent questions, and in this. It's really important that we hear from you, and please keep engaging with us on the Better Together site. And we'll be back soon.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.